Imagine finding out your wife has been cheating on you for years, only to have her ask for a second chance, right as your mistress offers you a future together. What would you do if both women wanted to stay in your life, at the same time? Looking back, I often find myself wondering how different my life might have been if I hadn't agreed to attend that pivotal business seminar in New York. It was during one of those corporate mixers, amidst the soft clinking of champagne glasses and bursts of polite laughter, that I first laid eyes on Lisa Groys. She wasn't in the spotlight, yet her presence seemed to command a quiet reverence, drawing people in without effort. I couldn't take my eyes off her. The mere idea of approaching her felt absurd. She seemed so out of my league that attempting to start a conversation felt pointless. At the time, my career was on an upward trajectory. I was a young, ambitious software salesman with a stellar track record and growing respect within the industry. That evening, fate intervened through a brief conversation with a mutual acquaintance, leading to my first introduction to Lisa. Though the exchange was brief, it left me completely awestruck. Her quick wit and understated elegance caught me off guard, disarming me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time, I dared to imagine a reality where I could be a part of her world. Lisa's background, however, was a stark contrast to mine. She had been raised in luxury, groomed from a young age to play a key role in her family's prestigious perfume empire. She led the kind of life most could only dream of. Yet, despite the expectations placed upon her, Lisa had carved out a unique identity. Her rebellious streak made her a source of both fascination and frustration for those around her. While her brothers seamlessly conformed to their parents' vision, Lisa's defiant nature set her apart, adding an intriguing complexity to her character. Our relationship wasn't without its hurdles. From the beginning, Lisa's parents made it clear they didn't approve of me. Their disapproval hung over every dinner, every gathering, and every interaction. But what amazed me was how unfazed Lisa seemed by it all. With a calm, self-assured demeanor, she brushed off their judgments with a confidence that left me both inspired and in awe. It was her unwavering choice to stand by me that gave me the strength to face their disdain head-on. Eventually, after countless battles, we reached an uneasy truce. The prenuptial agreement, which initially felt like a contentious and deeply personal matter, became the key to moving forward. However, one clause caught me off guard: Lisa's firm insistence that we include a provision against having children. Though it surprised me, it didn't shake my resolve. I attributed her stance to her upbringing, where legacy was measured in wealth and enterprise rather than family or offspring. I had always dreamed of being a father, but in the name of love, I pushed that desire aside. I convinced myself that what Lisa and I shared would be enough. For the first 3 years of our marriage, it felt like everything I had ever wanted. We traveled to exotic places, attended lavish events, and lived a life of luxury that often felt more like a fantasy than reality. Yet, beneath all the glamour, cracks quietly began to form. Lisa's frequent absences, always explained away as work-related, gradually strained our connection. At first, I chose to believe her dedication to her career was the only issue, but over time, subtle signs began to emerge, hinting that something deeper was amiss. The truth didn't fully hit me until I came across a photograph in a gossip column, one that forced me to confront the reality of our marriage. It became painfully clear that much of what we had built was laced with half-truths and hidden deceptions. That realization led us here, to the night when everything came to a head. After a long and exhausting day at work, I walked through the front door, bracing myself for what I had known was coming. Lisa was already there, standing in the entryway with a look of pure rage etched across her face. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, her fury erupted into a torrent of accusations I had dreaded for far too long. To be fair, Lisa had every reason to be furious. I had been unfaithful. But before rushing to judgment, it's important to understand that her betrayal came first. For more than 6 months, I had known about her affair. I lived with that knowledge, carrying the weight of her actions in silence. My own infidelity only began after years of harboring the pain of her deceit. Still, none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that Lisa had discovered my affair, and now I stood there, facing the storm head-on. "You pig," she screamed, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. From there, things quickly unraveled. Looking back, I think those were the gentlest words she hurled at me during her tirade. Though I couldn't catch every insult she spat in my direction, I didn't need to. Her anger was unmistakable, and the truth had come out. Even if I could have managed to get a word in, I wouldn't have known what to say to calm her down. So, I stood silently, my gaze fixed on the floor, waiting for the storm to subside. Eventually, her anger began to ebb, leaving a tense silence hanging in the air. Then came the inevitable question: what do you have to say for yourself? "I'll just file for divorce," I said quietly, my voice steady but drained of emotion. Lisa froze, her face paling as she gasped in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Without a word, I calmly opened my briefcase, retrieved a set of photos, and handed them to her, concrete proof of her infidelity. I had no idea what her reaction would be, but what happened next caught me completely off guard. Lisa, who had the wealth and influence to bury me in a mountain of legal troubles if she wanted, didn't erupt in anger as I had expected. Instead, she stared at the photos, let them fall from her hands, and broke down into uncontrollable sobs. "I don't want a divorce," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I love you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This was a woman who had built an empire, co-owning the world-renowned perfume company, Grawa Scents. Even after we got married, she had kept her maiden name, something that initially made me uneasy. Over time, though, I came to appreciate it. It gave us a certain degree of separation and privacy. Because we didn't share a last name, many people didn't even realize we were married, which allowed me to live without being constantly associated with her public persona. Looking back, I could hardly believe she had chosen me in the first place. Lisa was stunning, with long black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. When we first met, I had assumed she was just looking for a fleeting fling, something exciting and temporary. I wasn't interested in being someone's passing thrill, but Lisa's relentless pursuit of me after that party made it clear she had something more serious in mind. To be honest, I still didn't understand what someone like Lisa Groys could have seen in me. I was just a software salesman at the time, not exactly the kind of person who typically catches the eye of someone so glamorous. Despite my doubts, she remained adamant about wanting to be with me, even agreeing to a prenuptial agreement that her family insisted upon. The terms were strict. If we divorced within the first 3 years of marriage, I would walk away with only $500,000, a sum her family clearly thought was a pittance compared to their wealth. Though I found it hard to believe that anyone could refer to $500,000 as only, I signed the agreement. Lisa assured me that the prenuptial arrangement didn't matter to her and that she was committed to marrying me no matter what. Still, there was always a nagging voice in the back of my mind, wondering how long this marriage would really last. The terms of the prenup improved slightly after 3 years. For every additional year we remained married, I would receive another $500,000 if we ever separated. Yet during those first few years, I never gave the financial side of it much thought. I truly believed Lisa loved me. We were happy, or so I had convinced myself. But things began to shift not long after we celebrated our 3rd anniversary. I found out Lisa was having an affair. Our relationship had always been a bit unconventional, largely due to her demanding travel schedule. About 1 week out of every month, Lisa was away for work. In the early days of our marriage, I occasionally joined her on these trips, but as time passed, those opportunities grew fewer and farther between. Occasionally, she would be home for several consecutive weeks, but those stretches were rare. Despite her frequent absences, whenever she returned, things between us seemed normal, almost too normal. I had a steady income, which I mostly spent on gifts for Lisa. It was always a challenge, trying to surprise someone who already had everything. But as time went on, my suspicions about her began to grow, and with them came a gnawing sense of unease. Worry consumed me. I barely slept, and meals became an afterthought. I needed answers, real, undeniable proof, so I took matters into my own hands. Using my personal savings, I hired a private investigator. I deliberately chose a firm in St. Louis, a city Lisa's company had no known dealings with, to minimize the risk of her finding out. By then, Lisa's travel schedule had ramped up considerably. She was now away about 2 weeks each month. Strangely, despite her increasing absences, our physical relationship hadn't changed. She was as affectionate and passionate as ever when she was home, which only added to my confusion. Then I read something that made everything click into place. Gerard, her former flame, had lost his wife 6 months earlier. With Teresa gone, there was nothing preventing Gerard and Lisa from rekindling what they once had. The realization hit me hard. For 5 days, I was a complete wreck, unable to focus on anything but the idea that Lisa had gone back to the man she once loved. It explained so much, yet I still couldn't wrap my head around one thing: if she had reignited her old relationship, why hadn't she left me? Every time she returned home, she was attentive, loving, even passionate. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought things between us were perfect. I struggled to make sense of it, but nothing seemed to add up. Then there was Thelma. She was a co-worker of mine, recently divorced after catching her husband cheating. Thelma was attractive, perhaps an 8 or 9 compared to Lisa's undeniable 11. She had a great figure, a warm personality, and a relentless work ethic I admired. Despite the heartbreak of her failed marriage, she didn't seem particularly shattered by it. "You've been out of it all week," Thelma said one afternoon, her tone gentle but concerned. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I liked Thelma and respected her as a colleague, so after a moment of hesitation, I decided to be honest with her. "I just found out Lisa's been cheating on me," I admitted quietly. "And now I don't know what to do. Should I confront her or just ignore it? There's something Lisa will never give you: children. Having an affair alone won't solve that problem," Thelma said, her voice steady. "Sure, you could get a mistress pregnant, but that would only blow up your marriage." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her point. "True," I said, "so, what exactly are you getting at?" She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. Then, with a warm smile, she dropped a bombshell. "I think I could be the solution." I blinked, caught off guard. "Are you saying, you want to be my mistress?" "Not just your mistress," she said with a sly grin, leaning in slightly. "I want something more." I frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. The idea sounded absurd, but I couldn't deny that part of me was intrigued. Still, I knew there were potential issues to consider. I took a deep breath and began to voice my concerns. "First of all, thank you for even suggesting this," I said sincerely. "I'm genuinely flattered. This is far more than I ever expected, but there are a few problems. Finances could get complicated, raising and naming children could be tricky, and what if down the road you decide you want to get married?" Thelma nodded thoughtfully, clearly having anticipated these questions. "I've thought about all of that too," she said calmly. "Our first few outings together were innocent enough, just dinner and dancing. Later, we started including theater trips. It didn't take long for me to realize how much I enjoyed spending time with her. Thelma was warm, funny, and easy to talk to. Compared to sitting alone at home, waiting for Lisa to return from one of her endless work trips, my evenings with Thelma were a welcome escape. On our 5th date, as I dropped her off at her place, we shared a long, tight embrace in my car. By the 6th date, she turned to me with a playful smile and said, "We're definitely compatible on dates. Now, let's find out if we're compatible in other ways." Despite her bold proposal, Thelma never brought up the idea of becoming something more again, and over time, I thought less and less about it myself. I assumed she had decided against it, and honestly, I wasn't planning to revisit the subject either. By then, I was leaning toward divorcing Lisa outright and accepting whatever financial loss came with it. At least that way, I wouldn't end up like so many other husbands, completely destroyed, both emotionally and financially. I knew I'd still walk away with a decent settlement, even if it wasn't ideal. Then, 2 weeks later, Thelma caught me completely off guard. She walked into my office, placed a neatly prepared contract on my desk, and said, "Take your time." I picked up the document, confused but curious. As I read through the terms, I saw that she had thought of everything. The agreement outlined that any children we had together would carry my last name. If something ever happened to me, my assets would be placed in a trust for them until they turned 25. Thelma wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, only clarity, security, and a future for herself and any children we might have. For the first time, I realized just how serious Thelma was. The thought of building a life with her, of creating a family together, started to feel more real than it ever had before. Yet, I was still grappling with my decision, uncertain of which path to take. Then, on Monday, Lisa casually mentioned that her travel schedule would be increasing even more next year. That was the final nudge I needed. The very next day, I fully committed to Thelma. She had told me she was done with dating around the same time and planned to have a child through artificial insemination if things didn't work out between us. But 3 months after we first slept together, she called me with news that changed everything: she was pregnant. We continued our relationship throughout her pregnancy, staying physically close as much as her condition allowed. When Thelma went into labor, I couldn't be by her side because Lisa was home. Still, the moment I could slip away, I rushed to the hospital to meet my newborn son, Gavin, whom we named after her grandfather. 18 months later, we welcomed our daughter, Jennifer. Life with Thelma was unfolding exactly how I had hoped, until Lisa's travel schedule was suddenly scaled back. This unexpected shift threw a wrench into everything I had built with Thelma. Without Lisa frequently leaving town to see Gerard, sneaking away to visit Thelma began to feel hypocritical. As absurd as it may sound, it was easier to justify my double life when I knew Lisa was off with someone else. But now, with Lisa staying home more often, things grew complicated. To my surprise, Lisa seemed genuinely happy about spending more time together, and I felt a wave of unexpected relief. At first, Thelma was thrilled about the change, thinking it might mean more time for us as a family. But as the weeks passed, both women became increasingly frustrated. Lisa wanted to invest more time into our marriage, while Thelma was growing weary of living in the shadows. I found myself caught between two lives, unsure of how long I could keep up the charade. One evening, as Lisa and I sat together after dinner, I struggled to find the right words. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew it was time to finally confront the truth. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Lisa, I've known about your affair with Gerard for years. I always assumed you were ready to leave me and be with him." Lisa's eyes widened in shock, her face turning pale. She gasped, then whispered, "Oh my God. Why didn't you ever say anything?" I paused, trying to gather my thoughts. "At first, I was so hurt that I wanted to confront you right away and ask for a divorce," I admitted quietly. I was ready to file for divorce, I admitted, but over time, I realized it would only hurt me financially. And the truth is, I still loved you. Even after everything, the feelings never went away. But the pain of knowing what was happening behind my back was overwhelming. After my strange encounter with Lisa and her unexpected emotional outburst, I returned to Thelma, only to be met with something I hadn't anticipated: tears. "Why are you upset?" I asked softly after she had calmed down a bit. "It's obvious that Lisa still loves you deeply," Thelma said, her voice trembling. "She'll do whatever it takes to keep you." Her words left me baffled. "That doesn't make sense," I replied, shaking my head. "First, Lisa told me to leave, and second, she's been happy with Gerard for almost 10 years. How could she still love me?" "I don't know," Thelma said through her tears. But something's different now. Something's changed, and it's clear she doesn't want to let you go. Before I could respond, Lisa's tone shifted, becoming sharp and accusatory. Did you hire a private investigator or something? Her abrupt question caught me off guard. What? No. Why would I do that? One of my friends saw you at a restaurant the other day, she interrupted, her eyes narrowing. He said you were kissing her, passionately. He tried to follow her but lost track. She paused, letting her words settle before delivering the final blow. So, are you planning to keep seeing her? For a moment, I couldn't even process what she was saying. My mind raced, and all I could manage to mutter was, "Oh God." Well? Lisa pressed. Are you? I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. Lisa, I don't want to fight about this. You've made it clear where you stand, and I don't want things to get uglier than they already are. Still, Lisa didn't back down. Are you going to keep seeing her or not? She repeated firmly. In the days that followed, I prepared the divorce papers, but I held off on filing them. Instead, I decided it was safer to stay with Thelma while Lisa processed everything. That night, spending time with Thelma and the kids gave me an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, happiness. The next morning, however, I was blindsided. Lisa called my office, and instead of angrily demanding updates about the divorce papers, she made a surprising request. I want to meet Thelma, and your children, she said calmly. I froze, stunned by her words. What? I asked sharply, unable to hide my disbelief. Lisa, listen, I know you're upset. We can argue about everything later, but meeting Thelma and the kids? That's... I'm serious, she interrupted. If you're really moving on with her, I need to see what this life of yours looks like. I didn't know how to respond. The idea of introducing Lisa to Thelma and the kids seemed impossible, surreal even. Still, there was something in her tone, a quiet, unsettling determination, that made it clear she wasn't going to back down. Reluctantly, I agreed. I spent the rest of the day preparing myself for what I knew would be an unforgettable meeting. The next morning, as the time drew near, I found myself filled with dread, unsure of how things would play out. I brought Thelma and the kids to Lisa's house, unsure of what to expect. As we pulled up, Thelma seemed a bit overwhelmed by the grandeur of the estate. It wasn't surprising, Lisa's home was more like a mansion, complete with sprawling grounds, high gates, and perfectly manicured gardens. The kids, on the other hand, were practically buzzing with excitement after I mentioned the pool, game room, and even the indoor ice cream bar. Instead of walking in as I usually would, I rang the doorbell. To my surprise, Lisa herself answered. Normally, one of the household staff would have handled it since there were always a few around. I wondered why she had chosen to greet us personally this time. We entered, and after a brief tour for the kids, Lisa asked one of the staff to escort them to the game room. As soon as they were out of earshot, things got serious. Lisa turned to Thelma, her expression unreadable. I don't get it, Lisa said. You could have anyone you want. Why are you settling for this arrangement? Wouldn't you rather have a full-time husband? Without hesitation, Thelma responded firmly, David is the best man I've ever known. Even as a part-time partner and father, he's better than most full-time men I've met. No, I don't want anyone else, I want what David is willing to give me. Lisa's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a tear slip down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. She then turned to me. David, could you check on the kids? I'd like a little time alone with Thelma. I glanced at Thelma. Though she looked a bit nervous, she gave me a small nod. Reluctantly, I left them alone, not entirely sure what was happening. This meeting had started with the assumption that we'd be discussing divorce, but it was quickly turning into something else entirely, something I didn't understand. A few minutes later, I returned to the room, still feeling uneasy. I tried to steady my voice as I said, "Look, Lisa, I don't get it. You've been cheating on me with Gerard for nearly 9 years. Yes, I cheated too, but only after you started it. Why are you clinging to me now when you could have been with him all this time? Just divorce me, and you'll be free." Lisa burst into tears at my words. Before I could process what was happening, Thelma smacked my arm. "What was that for?" I asked, startled and irritated. "Gerard is dead," Thelma said softly. Her words stunned me into silence. I hadn't known. Suddenly, everything began to make sense: Lisa's sudden desire to be around more, her change in demeanor, and her insistence on keeping our marriage intact. She wasn't clinging to me because she still had Gerard waiting in the wings. He was gone, and now, for reasons I still couldn't comprehend, she wanted to hold on to me. At that moment, I could almost hear men across the world envying my position, 2 women wanting to share one man. But all I could see was impending chaos. This wasn't a dream scenario, it was a disaster waiting to happen. I looked between Lisa and Thelma, both of whom were watching me with a mix of hope and anxiety. Finally, I decided to play dumb. "So, how exactly is this supposed to work?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Without missing a beat, Thelma pulled out a notepad and flipped to a page filled with notes and a detailed schedule. It turned out that the 2 of them had already discussed and worked out a plan. The basic idea was that Lisa would remain in the master bedroom, while Thelma would continue living in her own home with the kids. The schedule was surprisingly thorough, covering everything from shared weekends to alternating holidays. Conveniently, I had a business trip scheduled for the next day, which gave me some time to process this bizarre situation, or at least pretend to. I promised both Lisa and Thelma that I would give them my decision after I returned from my business trip. Surprisingly, despite everything weighing on my mind, I managed to stay focused on work. I even closed a major deal with Stellar Enterprises, which felt like a personal victory amid the chaos in my personal life. But as the plane touched down back home, a sudden realization hit me: I had already made up my mind. I was going to accept their arrangement. The next step was formalizing everything. Thelma took the updated terms to her brother Tim, who worked as a lawyer, to draft a new agreement. When she explained the situation to him, his eyes widened in disbelief. By the time she finished, Tim turned to me, looking as though he didn't know whether to be impressed or concerned. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked cautiously. "I've thought it through," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. But before I could second-guess anything further, life threw another curveball my way. We gathered that evening at Lisa's house to finalize the details, but before we could even begin, Lisa spoke up, her expression serious. "David, I want to have a baby," she announced. I was stunned. Out of all the possible topics they could have brought up, this was the absolute last thing I had expected. Lisa wanting a child. It felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. What? I stammered, trying to process her words. Lisa continued, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I know I always said I didn't want children, but something changed. Watching you with Thelma's kids stirred something in me. I see how happy they make you, how much joy they bring into your life, and I want that too. I want to experience it." I rubbed my temples, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Lisa, what are you talking about?" I asked, exasperated. "You were adamant for years that you didn't want kids. Why now?" Lisa reached for my hand, her eyes steady. "Let's all sit down, have a drink, and take a moment to calm down. Once we've had a chance to breathe, I'll explain everything. And I promise, we'll respect whatever decision you make." Still in a state of disbelief, I poured myself a shot of whiskey. After the first burn settled in my throat, I asked her directly, "Lisa, are you sure about this? Wanting a child is a huge shift for you." She nodded slowly, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about this for a while. Spending time with Thelma's kids awakened something in me, a maternal instinct I didn't know I had. I tried to ignore it at first, but it's grown stronger, and I can't push it aside anymore." Lisa's words hung heavily in the air. Thelma remained silent, her expression unreadable. I could tell she hadn't been expecting this either. Meanwhile, I tried to gauge whether Lisa's sudden change of heart was genuine or just another twist in our already complicated relationship. As we continued the conversation, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for our arrangement. This wasn't just about agreeing to an unconventional lifestyle anymore, this was a potential turning point that could alter everything we had planned. Despite my questions and doubts, neither Lisa nor Thelma pushed me for an immediate response. They simply waited, allowing me the space to process what had just been said. One thing was clear, whatever decision I made next would shape all of our futures. I didn't argue. If Lisa wanted a baby, I wasn't going to stand in her way. The only real downside was that her parents began visiting more frequently to see their granddaughter, Charlotte. Their visits added a layer of complexity to our already unconventional arrangement. I was fairly certain they didn't believe Lisa's explanation about always having an assistant around. Their curious glances and lingering looks made that obvious. As for the kids, when they were younger, they didn't question much about our unusual family setup. But as they grew older, we knew it was important to explain things. We told them the truth, well, a version of it that made sense to their young minds. Surprisingly, they accepted it without much difficulty, a reminder of what truly mattered, love and unity. In those early months, Charlotte's arrival brought new purpose to all of us. Thelma delighted in caring for her, often saying that watching Charlotte bond with Gavin, Jennifer, and Scotty felt like it was healing old wounds. The older children welcomed their new sibling with open arms, their joyful laughter frequently echoing through the halls of Lisa's estate. And as for Lisa, motherhood softened her in ways I never thought possible. She became more patient, more reflective, and the transformation had a ripple effect on all of us. It changed the dynamic of our relationship, deepening our connection in ways I hadn't anticipated. Even Lisa's parents, while never fully embracing Thelma or acknowledging my other children, served as an olive branch of sorts. Their presence added a semblance of normalcy to Charlotte's life, which we appreciated. Over time, birthdays, milestones, and shared victories blurred together, creating a patchwork of memories that bound us tightly as a family. Charlotte grew into a bright and inquisitive child. From a young age, she had an uncanny ability to mediate conflicts. It wasn't uncommon to hear her small voice during sibling squabbles, gently reminding them, "We're all one big family, remember?" As she entered her teenage years, things became more challenging. Navigating adolescence in a blended family required patience, constant communication, and adaptability. There were moments of rebellion, awkward family therapy sessions, and occasional outbursts of frustration. But those difficulties only made us stronger. Every challenge we faced reinforced the bond we shared, proving time and time again that love could bridge even the most unconventional of relationships. One of the most poignant moments came when Charlotte, at just 16 years old, approached me with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," she asked, "how did you, Mom, and Thelma manage to make this work?" Her question struck me deeply, and I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it worked because we all wanted it to. We loved each other enough to build something unique, something that might not make sense to everyone else, but made sense to us. Charlotte smiled, her eyes shining with understanding. I often wondered if those early experiences in our blended household shaped her natural talent for diplomacy. It wasn't a surprise when, later in life, she went on to build a career in international relations, bridging divides much like she had done within our family. As for Lisa, Thelma, and me, our lives continued to intertwine in ways that transcended traditional definitions of love. What began as an unconventional relationship evolved into something deeper, a profound respect and appreciation for the life we had built together. We often found ourselves reflecting on how far we had come, marveling at the strength and perseverance it took to create and sustain our unique family. In the twilight years of our lives, we would often sit together on the veranda, watching the sun set over the horizon, sharing quiet moments filled with gratitude. We had weathered storms, defied expectations, and found something rare, an enduring love that went beyond convention, rooted in trust, understanding, and the shared journey we had undertaken together.